Hello, book lovers! I'm Rachel Barenbaum, author of the novel Atomic Anna. You're listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio and the Penn Faulkner Foundation. I write novels, and on this show, I get to do one of my favorite things in the world, talk to other writers about their brand new books. And if you're like me and get tired of seeing the same titles on every bestseller list, you are in the right place. Because on this show, you'll hear from authors who aren't famous yet, but probably will be. Remember, you heard them here first. Today on my show, Daniyal Mueenuddin and his new novel, This Is Where the Serpent Lives. This book follows a cast of characters in Pakistan, taking us from the chaotic cities to lawless feudal countrysides. This is an expansive novel about power, family, love, and tragedy. Later in the hour, on our Book Biz segment, we'll also talk to Vauhini Vara, a journalist who covers AI for The Atlantic and Business Week. We're going to talk to her all about AI and specifically how it's affecting writing. But like I said, we're going to start with Daniyal Mueenuddin and his brand new novel, This Is Where the Serpent Lives. Daniyal, I'm so excited to have you here on Check This Out. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
First, I want to ask you, what is this book about?
It's about a feudal family in Pakistan, a feudal family being a family that have owned land there in Punjab for a number of generations. And it's about the apparatus that makes them who they are. These are these guys who, in the case of my characters, they're farmers who then become industrialists. And these feudals are always political in some degree. So they're sort of politicians slash industrialists slash farmers in a sort of a strange sense. And then it's about all the people who live around them and who sort of make their lives possible. Within that frame, it's about power and status and how people try to increase their status and how people try to rise and how they're prevented from rising.
Would you read for us to introduce us to your new novel, This Is Where the Serpent Lives?
Absolutely. I think what I'll do is I'll just read to you from the beginning of the book, the first page or so, and we'll take it from there. Bayezid never knew how he came to be little boy alone in the streets of Rawalpindi. He had a memory more of forces than of people, a crowd, a hand no more. Yet the bazaars in those early 1950s were not so crowded as that, and Rawalpindi a town small enough that a lost little boy should be found. That was a bitter day when he accepted years later that there might have been no hand, no desperate parent seeking him in the crowd. He might have been abandoned, not lost. Karim Khan, the owner of the tea and curry stall where his known history began, could tell him only that he had been sitting in front of the stall on a fine winter day, 3 or 4 years old, wearing just a shalwar kameez, barefoot and clean, holding a new pair of cheap plastic shoes tightly in his arms, as if afraid they would be taken away, and scanning the crowds passing by. The shoes had caught Karim Khan's eye, not only because they were brand new, but because the children of the streets, those sparrows, ran barefoot always. In those early years following the great Indian partition, families drifted about, mothers dead, fathers dead, murdered for religion's sake, for politics, unwelcome children without parents thrown on some relative's mercy. Karim Khan thought this must be one of those stories. Hindus stuck on the wrong side of the border and on the run, an unwanted child, though that didn't explain the shoes.
That was Daniyal Mueenuddin reading from This Is Where the Serpent Lives. I absolutely love that opening, and it introduces my favorite character, Yazid, and we'll get to him later. So this book is divided into 4 distinct sections. They're almost short stories, except you have all these linked characters and the setting, right? So it could be read separately. It could be read as a whole novel. Talk about that. How do you think about these 4 sections and the whole shape of this novel?
It's basically 3 novellas and then a novel, essentially, because the last section is so long, it's more than 60,000 words, so it could actually stand alone as a book. The two of the stories were published in the New Yorker as standalone stories, so the New Yorker thinks that they're stories. I really like this form. It's sort of a weird form. I don't think there's another book I've read that is shaped quite like this one is. Pakistan is a chaotic place, and I'm writing about a sort of complex subject that it's very hard to write about it in a straight through narrative line. I really like about this form that it allowed me to sort of come at that same subject, which is about the theme of, sort of power and status in Pakistan. And I could come at it from sort of different angles using these different stories, coming at it from below, coming at it from above, coming at it from the side.
In this novel, This Is Where the Serpent Lives, it is sort of like a collection of short stories, but you actually started, your first book was actually a collection of short stories.
Yeah, that's right. And those were also, closely bound together. Some of the same characters appeared, and some of those, I mean, that also was more than just a book of short stories. It was a book of integrated short stories. This is much more integrated. Certainly, it isn't a conventional novel, but there's a lot of, it has aspects of short stories and aspects of a novel, let's put it that way. And it's been interesting to see the way people read it.
I'm talking to Daniyal Mueenuddin about his brand new novel, This Is Where the Serpent Lives. Power is really a core theme that I want to talk to you a lot more about later in this interview. But let's start with the characters, because although this is a sweeping novel and there's a lot going on, it all starts with the characters, right? The very intimate moments. And we start with my favorite character, Yazid. I really had a soft spot for him from the moment we meet him as an orphan in the bazaar. Introduce us to him and tell us about this character.
Well, Yasid is this sort of, I mean, I think of him as sort of a Falstaff character almost. He's one of those bigger than, larger than life types. And that's, you and many others have found him particularly interesting and attractive. And that's because that is a type that's very attractive. He's the trickster, and also he's the sort of Falstaff, this guy who sort of ambles and rambles through life with big appetites. And he's a comic character to some extent.
He is actually physically larger than life, too. I mean, you make him to be physically a very large character. And when we meet him, he's in the bazaar around 1955. He's been abandoned. He's clutching a pair of shoes, and he's at a tea stall. And so, immediately it's tugging at the heartstrings of there's this poor kid who's been abandoned, and slowly he's taken in by the owner of the tea stall, and he becomes a fixture there and in the bazaar in general.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, is more than any of the other characters in the book is based upon a real character. It's this guy who worked initially for my father and now works for me in Pakistan. And he looks exactly like this. He's this great big shaggy sort of bear of a guy. He's now in his late 70s, I suppose, and is extremely clever, both clever and also wise and smart, and who is trying very hard to sort of improve himself. Just as the real character, the one on whom he's based, is a guy who was, it's slightly different, but he was basically found in the bazaar and worked his way up.
And also, this character, Yazid, in your novel, This Is Where the Serpent Lives, he's quietly ambitious, right? I mean, he could just spend out his days serving tea, helping the owner of the stall, right? But he teaches himself instead to read, to observe the boys who have more, to sort of take on their manners and their sort of how they look and act, and befriends one of them, in fact.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a guy who's, is not, doesn't go to school. He's not educated, educates himself. And part of what's going on in the story is him sort of gradually trying to figure out how can he increase his status and how can he have a more interesting, more powerful life. And that's sort of the arc that I described of this guy rising up and then, running up against the fact that in Pakistan it's very difficult to rise. It's hard to rise anywhere, but in Pakistan it's particularly difficult.
But what I really liked about him was this quiet ambition. He didn't wake up every day or tell everybody, I'm going to, make something of myself. I'm going to do something. It was, he slowly teaches himself to read, slowly moves up. And in this very heartwarming way of like, you're just cheering for him. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Because he has some fear in him, too. He's not pure ambition. And he has a very big heart for the people that he loves.
Yeah. I think, I mean, that partly is strategy. I mean, he does it intuitively, but I think the last thing you want to do if you're trying to change your circumstances is to shout about the fact that you're trying to do so. He's sneaking his way up, and when you rise and when you come from nowhere, I think that's part of what you have to do is to sort of sublimate your desire to tell everybody how great you are, and how great you want to be, and you just sort of inch into inch forward in your progress. So that's good management of his ambition.
But there are some characters in literature who are loudmouth, open, I'm going to rule the world. I'm going to get out of here, right? I mean, you chose to make him this more quiet character.
In Pakistan, I think that would be a very much less winning strategy than in some other places, just because everyone is so determined to, keep the pyramid of status rigid. People, it's a very desperate place. People are poor, people are hungry, and therefore nobody wants anybody else to come upwards into their sphere. There's a great pressure to keep the thing the way it is, particularly from the people on the top.
I'm Rachel Barenbaum. If you're just joining us, I'm talking to Daniyal Mueenuddin about his brand new novel, This Is Where the Serpent Lives. Let's talk about this triangle, or this idea of trying to rise up in Pakistan. You grew up, I understand, spending winters in Pakistan and summers in America. So you know this world very intimately, and this feudal system that this book is based on. Talk to us about this feudal system. You started in 1955, and you bring it forward quite a ways. But so I guess start us off there in 1955, where the book starts.
Yeah, Pakistan is a country in which was originally, until quite recently, all the power was held by these so-called feudals, particularly in Punjab. Pakistan has four provinces, or did have four provinces, and the sort of dominant province has always been the Punjab, and the Punjab has been dominated by these landowners who were politically powerful because they had votes that they could count upon, and wherever they had their constituencies. It's sort of like the English, except much more violent. And that has now changed. And part of what I show in this book is the ways in which this has changed, that there's been an evolution. The Tar family, who are the family that I describe in my book, are somewhat exempt from that failure of the feudal class because they are also industrialists. They've gone into industry, and that the old patriarch is a very prominent politician. But yeah, these are the people who've been running the country for a long time, and to some extent they still do. Now Pakistan is much more run by the army and by the business class, so it's changed. But the ones I'm describing are these old feudals, and sort of describing the twilight of that feudal empowered class.
And you have this character, Yazid, who is the through line. And we see him rise up from where he was in the tea stall to making friends, to becoming a driver, right? And more. We see it. He is your through line through this change in Pakistan.
He, and also the family for whom he comes to work, the Attar family. So he's sort of, the Attar family is the umbrella under which all these guys sit. And one of them is this Yazid guy. The other one is Saqib, who comes in at the end. And then in the middle, we have much more about the Attar family themselves. But yeah, he's the one character who's the most prominently featured throughout the book.
I guess as I kept reading it, I would think about the Attar family. It's like, oh, yeah, okay, they're there and they're paying for everything. But what's Yazid doing? And where is he? And I sort of kept looking for him because his story was more unexpected for me.
I've gotten that a lot. That he's the big, great favorite among everybody.
So where did this book start? This Is Where the Serpent Lives. Did it start with these characters, or did it start with this system and the setting of Pakistan and in the feudal system?
Well, both, I suppose. I mean, I knew that when I was writing this, as I began writing the book, I knew that certainly that I would be writing it in that context of the Pakistani feudal families. That's been my experience. I've been running a farm in Pakistan now since 1987. So that's the world I know best, and that for me it's almost a metaphorical thing that you use what you know to write about human character and human predicaments and human aspirations and goals and all that, and that's the world that I know well, and so that's where I put these guys. That's the canvas, and then onto that you project your characters. Yeah, I began with Yazid, and then it grew from there.
I love that you just threw in there, I've been running a farm since the 80s, because I don't think I've ever had anybody on the show who runs a farm. And that's amazing. What do you farm?
Mostly mangoes, but also sugarcane and wheat and cotton.
But not cucumbers? Cucumber farming.
We very much do cucumbers. We do exactly the way it's described in the book. We do these, it's called tunnel farming. And I use that because it's a great way to make money. It's also a great way to lose money.
Yeah. And you go into that in great detail in the book. And I did not look into your bio or anything before I read the book. And I was reading those sections about cucumber farming and tunnel farming. And I just said to myself, this guy had to have worked on a farm at least. He knows this so intimately.
Yeah, no, my day job is very much running this farm, although I do it from a distance at the moment.
I'm Rachel Barenbaum. You're listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio. Last season, we spoke to Maria Reva about her debut novel, Endling. That novel has since been longlisted for the Booker Prize, the Dublin Literary Award, and the Climate Fiction Prize, and won the 2025 Atwood Gibson Writers Trust Fiction Prize. Congratulations, Maria! It's a lot of awards. If you haven't read her book yet, check it out and listen to the episode wherever you get your podcasts or on NHPR.org. My guest today is Daniyal Mueenuddin, and we are talking about his brand new novel, This Is Where the Serpent Lives. This book follows a cast of characters in Pakistan, taking us from the chaotic cities to lawless feudal countrysides. It's an expansive novel about power, family, love, and tragedy. It's called This Is Where the Serpent Lives. Daniyal, we've talked a little bit about Pakistan and how it's changed. The book starts in the 50s and moves forward. And there are a lot of changes that you highlight in this novel. What is the most important change to you? What did you really want us readers to see as the biggest change that happened in Pakistan during this time?
Well, I think that what you see in this as the book moves forward is that the circumstance changes, but the difficulties in moving and rising in status, that those challenges don't diminish, but they actually become greater, as we see in the book, because the initial character is able to rise to a eminence that he wants to, that satisfies him, whereas the final character, Saqib, does not. And I think that one of the things that's interesting about Pakistan through the years is that, it changes and yet nothing changes at all. And I think that's really fascinating.
I like that. Some things change, but really nothing changes at all. I mean, that is the core of humanity too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's right.
In this novel, This Is Where the Serpent Lives. Another one of the main characters we've talked about a little bit is the Attar family, and these two brothers in particular. And one of the scenes that really moved me the most is when the two brothers are sitting on a glacier together, and one brother has just betrayed the other, and they're talking about it. And it's a very emotional, fraught scene. I feel like they should be screaming at each other or yelling or taking it out, this anger on each other. And instead, they're very quietly talking. Would you read this for us?
Yeah.
And then we'll talk about it.
Okay. Ready? Just listen. Remember the story of Napoleon and the barber? Napoleon, the emperor. The barber was shaving the emperor with a straight razor. He's just getting those difficult hairs around the throat, and he whispers, "Do you know, Your Majesty, right now I'm the most powerful man in France. You hold the empire in your hands, and I hold you in mine." And the emperor says nothing and lets the man finish. And as soon as he steps away, calls the orderly and tells him to arrest the man. No one is allowed to think such things about him. I don't get it. When you slid down beside me, I thought, just a little push, and off you go, away and down the gorge and out to the Canard River. I said, "I'm sorry. Please, let me explain." "Well, it was just a thought, just a little push. But I'm just saying that. What I was doing, I was watching the river flowing out, and I was saying goodbye. I was thinking that this same water, in a few weeks, when it joins the Indus, it runs right past Ran Malmora. The exact same water under my feet might flow into our canal and into the orchard. The gardeners might be watering the lawns with it. That's what I was thinking. And this is the last time I'll ever come up here. Last time ever."
That's Daniyal Mueenuddin reading from his novel, This Is Where the Serpent Lives. It's such a beautiful passage, and it's really the moment where these two brothers split. And again, it's so quiet. It's not an explosion. They're just sitting there quietly. Can you talk about this moment?
Yeah, the scene is set in a place that I have been twice, way up in the mountains in Pakistan. I wanted to sort of take them there and then have them have this confrontation. But the younger brother, who's the one who loses in a certain sense, the confrontation, is just a quiet guy. I mean, what's going on here is that one of the elder brother, who's charismatic and loud and aggressive, has been pushing around the younger in various ways, and the younger just says, "I refuse to interact with you anymore. I'd rather go away and leave it all to you than fight with you for it." Each finds his own center, I think, in that moment. That the younger, who then goes off to America and becomes a very successful lawyer, renounces his birthright essentially, and the elder takes it all.
And he has this moment where he's thinking, the younger brother is thinking, I could have just pushed you down into the river and that would be the end.
Yeah.
And that's such a strong moment.
Yeah, well, exactly. No, that I remember when I was up there seeing this, and years later, now remembering it, the glacier would came down off the mountain slope, and it actually crossed the river, and the river was burrowing under it. And we went and walked out on it, and it was very unstable, and we were afraid of falling in. And then when I was writing this, when I was thinking about this scene, I realized that would be the perfect place to put him, because it really would just take, the river is so cold and so fast running, just a little push and off he goes down the side of it, and that would be the end of it.
Wow. I thought there was just something so human about it, too, because the little brother was betrayed so terribly by the big brother.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know. Isn't it? They say all's fair in love and war.
Maybe. Okay, we have to mention, of course, that these two brothers went to Dartmouth.
That's true.
Let's talk about the role that Dartmouth plays in there, because we're here at NHPR, right? Dartmouth is in New Hampshire. So talk about Dartmouth for me and your connection there.
Well, I went to Dartmouth back in the day, and so that's in fact, I described there's an apartment that I described, which is very much like the apartment I had. For me, Dartmouth was this incredibly rich place where I didn't have the experience I think that most kids have, because I went there and was sort of geeked out and camped out in the Baker Library, and had an incredible intellectual experience. I think a lot of kids go and do more beer drinking than librarying, but I spent my time in the library and really loved the place. I was just back up there recently doing a reading and met my old college professor, who's now 95 years old or something, and still sharp as a tack. He taught me Proust and Joyce and Mann and all those, the people who really inform my understanding of literature. So he was he was central to my growing up and to my becoming a writer, because he was the one. It was with him that I first read those books, which I still continue reading. I mean, I read Joyce all the time, and he was the guy who turned me on to it.
So the younger Attar brother that we just read about in This Is Where the Serpent Lives, you said goes on and becomes a lawyer, a very successful lawyer in the U.S., and you also became a lawyer here in the U.S. and practiced for a little while.
Yeah, that's right. For a while, I practiced. Yeah, I was, I'd always wanted to be a poet. Actually, I'd never thought of being a fiction writer, and for years and years, while I was living in Pakistan on my farm, sort of the way I kept my sanity was by writing poetry and reading poetry and reading a lot. I was living way out, and my farm is very far out in the countryside. It's halfway between Lahore and Karachi, and there's nobody around to talk to really, that you could talk to about books. I can talk lots of people to talk to about business. Yeah, so I was writing poetry and doing that, and then at some point realized that that wasn't going to work for me. That I was a pretty good poet, but I wasn't a great poet, and I wasn't going to ever achieve what I wanted. And with poetry, I think you're either excellent or you're nothing, because being a second-rate poet is just not really a workable identity. So yeah, so I quit. I didn't quit writing, of course. So I kept writing, but I decided to go off to law school and do human rights law. Went off to law school, got my degree, and then worked at Human Rights Watch for a while, and then worked at one of these big law firms in New York City for 3 years. And then at some point, I just realized that I didn't want to do that. I hated it. I was working all the time, and what I was doing was making rich people richer. And I'd done the Human Rights Watch thing, and that somehow hadn't satisfied me. And I decided that I would rather go back to writing and take a new angle at it and become a fiction writer. And so, yeah, the first piece of fiction I ever wrote was my application for an MFA program. I went and did that in Arizona at the University of Arizona in Tucson, where they have a really good writing program. Um, yeah, and that was for me a really transformational time. I mean, it was two of the best years of my life. Were in Tucson, Arizona, writing many stories, and going back into that world, and then from that is I come where I am now. And throughout this period, of course, I was still continuing to run my farm.
If you're just joining us, I'm Rachel Barenbaum. You're listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio. My guest today is Daniyal Mueenuddin, and we are talking about his brand new novel, This Is Where the Serpent Lives. In this novel, we also have the character of Rustem, who had a smaller role, in a sense, in the book, and yet to me was also a very powerful figure because he comes back from schooling in the U.S. He goes to Pakistan and he has to figure out how to run his grandfather's farm and empire, and he feels completely lost. And I wanted to ask how personal that was for you. Did you experience that? Like, how did you get into that mindset? And talk about his character. Maybe it's not personal at all. I don't know.
No, it is very personal. That's exactly what happened to me. When I was finishing up at Dartmouth, my father was much older than my mother, so he was an old man at that point. He was, in his 80s, and he sent me a letter, sort of one of these, dear son letters that, those letters that mean a lot, saying, "Look, you can come back to Pakistan and take care of the business and take care of your business." He had other children, but he had decided to give away his property, and very King Lear like. And so he was giving me this farm, me and my brother, this farm, and he said, "Look, this farm is very threatened because I haven't been able to visit it in many years, and the people who are running it for me are essentially declaring independence, as tends to happen in Pakistan. In Pakistan, if you don't take care of your property very carefully, somebody will take it away from you." And these guys were in the process of doing that, and they had assumed that my brother and I, who'd gone off to school in America, were highly unlikely to come back and go into the wastes of the South Punjab and fight for it. But I decided that because I had this ambition to write poetry, that would be a great place to go do that. And I'd spent my childhood hunting at this farm and riding, and loved the place deeply. So yeah, so I went back and lived there for a number of years and had very much the same experience that Rustam has, which is that the locals were not delighted to see me come and were determined to get me out of there as quickly as they could. So they made life unpleasant for me in various ways. In the story, I described the fact that my lifeline when I was there was this telephone. My telephone number was 27. So as you can imagine, there were not a lot of telephones in the area, but I had one of them. They would constantly be cutting the wire and stealing the wire, which was just incredibly annoying, because the one thing that I could do is, at least in my sort of solitude there, you had to book the call, and I would book the call to Lahore and talk to people in Lahore. And it made me feel better. It took 13 hours to drive to Lahore. It was a long distance. Even now it's 8 hours. And so I would, my only human contact was by using this bloody telephone, and they kept cutting the wire, and they would cut the wire and steal it. And then the original wire was made of copper, which was valuable. So they would cut a piece of it out, and then I would send people, and we would put in a piece of non-copper, just a regular wire, which also worked. And that was sort of that was the beginning of the story, that memory.
I love that it was that personal, because it really did feel like something that you had lived, that you knew so firsthand. But Rustam deals with some unsavory characters, and there is some violence in there. And what his character highlights, and This Is Where the Serpent Lives, is, I thought, really this idea of the underclass and right, the struggle between the two, in ways that it wasn't as obvious, right? If one group of people are stealing copper from the wire, right, that's different from very different kind of theft and a different kind of violence and clash between the classes. Let's talk about that clash between the classes there.
Well, this Rustam is being stolen from by very many people. Everybody is stealing from him. His own manager is stealing from him, and all his household servants are stealing from him. That he comes in there, and it's the whole Pakistan is in Pakistan. It's assumed that people will steal, and it's the case. I mean, if you look at right from the prime minister on down, everybody is on the take. Even now, even more now. So this is very much the norm, and he's been abroad in boarding school and then at college. And he comes there and he's got all these Western ideas about how to run the place. And that's very much contrary to the way things function in Pakistan. The way things function in Pakistan is with, you take what you can and you use force and violence to get what you need, get your way. And he doesn't want to do it that way. And then he finds that he has to because the people around him won't listen any other way.
When people are done reading this book, what do you want them thinking?
One of the things I'd certainly like people to come away with is the universality of what I'm describing. I mean, it's a very sort of exotic and colorful scene that I described, but people are pretty much the same everywhere. And I'm hoping that, my readers in the West certainly will think, hey, wow, that's very familiar to me in certain ways, that, it's in a different costume, but it's the same experiences that I've had and the same pressures that I observe in the people around me. I think there's a real universality. I mean, everybody wants to rise, and it's very hard to do so. And there are lots of, these tensions and pressures and desires are universal, I think. And I hope that that's what people will find.
Daniyal Mueenuddin, thank you so much for joining me here on Check This Out. I had a blast talking to you.
Thank you very much for having me.
That was Daniyal Mueenuddin, author of This Is Where the Serpent Lives. I'm Rachel Barenbaum. You're listening to Check This Out from New Hampshire Public Radio. Now we're moving to a new segment of the show called the Book Biz. This is where we look at the forces shaping what gets written, published, and read. Today we're talking to Vauhini Vara, a journalist who covers AI for The Atlantic and Business Week. You've also heard her on our show as a novelist. Her new book, Searches, Selfhood in the Digital Age, is just out in paperback. Vauhini, today we're going to talk about AI and specifically how it's affecting writing. You've probably seen the headlines. Most recently, a major publisher, my publisher, Hachette, pulled a book after readers realized it had been written with AI. At the same time, more and more writers are experimenting with these tools in their own work. So what is AI actually doing to writing? Who is it helping? Who might it be hurting? Vauhini Vara, welcome to the show. I can't wait to talk to you about all of these questions.
Thank you for having me, Rachel.
For listeners who are just starting to hear about this, what is AI doing in writing right now?
There have been a lot of instances of writers putting AI in their work, and in some cases, they've disclosed it. In other cases, they have not disclosed it at first and later disclosed it. And then most recently, there's been a high-profile case with this book you mentioned called Shy Girl, in which the book was published, the book was self-published, and then the publisher Hachette picked it up and traditionally was about to publish it. And then readers, as you said, realized that maybe there was some AI language in it, and Hachette pulled publication of the book. And so there are all kinds of ways in which AI is showing up in books. And the truth is that we might not be aware of some of it.
Yeah, which is crazy. So we're seeing AI basically writing entire articles, entire books, or maybe just paragraphs or just chapters. Sort of writers are using it to write a little bit of everything that they're doing, some mix. And I love with this Hachette example, it was the readers who found it. Let's talk about that. What happened there?
So readers started to notice something fishy about this book. They were reading the book and noticing language that felt familiar, in that it felt like stuff they'd seen AI produce. And so they started talking about it online among themselves, which is so great, right? So the community of readers really kind of in collaboration started realizing this. What happened next was that some people, including people with a kind of AI research background, ran the text through an AI detection platform called Pangram and found that it seemed, according to Pangram, that a lot of the text had these sort of telltale signs of being suspiciously AI-like. And what the author says is that she had an acquaintance edit the book, and that acquaintance inserted AI language. It wasn't her.
So this is a really big moment in publishing, right? We had this whole book that was going to go out there, be traditionally published by one of the big guys, and then the readers realize it's not. But also we're seeing it in smaller moments, and you've written about that. What do you think this moment signals? What does it signal to you?
Yeah, we've it turns out that people have been using AI across publishing, not just in books, but in the newspapers we read all the time. So I wrote this piece for The Atlantic about a modern love column that a lot of readers thought had some suspiciously AI-like language in it. Again, people ran it through Pangram and other AI detection platforms and found that indeed there was suspiciously AI-like language in it. And then the author of that modern love column told me that she had used about 5 different AI chatbot platforms in her writing and editing process. So she says she didn't copy and paste AI language into the piece, but she definitely made significant use of these platforms. Other journalists have also talked openly about putting AI. Other writers have also talked openly about using AI in their writing process. So it's happening across the board.
And there seems to be some sort of line here, right? You're saying like, oh, it was my colleague who did it, not me. Or like people have excuses, and they talk about how they used it or didn't. What is this line? Like, what are people thinking?
Well, I think that's the great important question that I think a lot of people aren't asking. So I'm glad you bring it up, Rachel. The truth is a lot of both publishers, book publishers, and media companies, places like the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, tend to have very vague AI oriented policies. So, for example, the New York Times says if we use significant amounts of AI, we will disclose it to readers. But there's a question, of course, about what that line is. No, none of these publications are saying, for example, the kind of AI use that is unacceptable is having a chatbot generate text and then copy and pasting that text into the document. The kind of AI use that is acceptable is copy and pasting your whole piece into Grammarly or ChatGPT and asking it to edit it for you. And we don't know what they consider acceptable and therefore okay to not disclose, maybe, and what they consider rising to the level of needing to be disclosed. And so, like, this question of transparency, whether we need to be told about it, is all bound up in the question of like what people consider okay or not.
Yeah, because I've seen as a writer myself, if I apply for a residency, I have to sign something that says, I swear that I didn't use AI at all in this application or in this piece of writing that I'm giving you. But then I'm thinking, well, what is AI? Because I use spell check. So did I use AI? Like, can I sign this? What is that line? And how do you answer that question?
I think what we need to do as a culture, as a society, is figure out what those lines are, what we collectively consider acceptable or not acceptable. And maybe we all have different ideas of what's acceptable or not. And if that's the case, it would seem to follow that any use of AI should be disclosed. And that way, readers can determine whether the use of AI in a particular instance is acceptable to them or not, right? Do they want to read that article or not? Um, but the other challenge is that these days everything is called AI. AI in some ways is a marketing term that's come to encompass all kinds of different technologies. So for example, the investigative journalism organization ProPublica uses certain kinds of AI to further their really impressive investigative journalism, right? But that is different from having ChatGPT write their sentences or edit their sentences. And so I think we need a lot more precision too about what we mean when we say we're using or not using AI.
So, on a controversial level, I've definitely spoken to other writers who are angry about this as any kind of question at all because they say if it's good writing, I had to program the plot basically. I had to say to Chat or Claude or whoever, this is what I want to write about. This is what I want my, conclusion to be, right? You have to put all that in. Can you write that for me in a format that fits X, Y, or Z? So what's it matter if AI is writing that for you?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's a fair question in that maybe there are writers and maybe there are corresponding readers for whom that's a valuable reading experience. So, sort of like seen through a lens in which a book is a product or an essay is a product, like if there are producers who want to use this method of producing language and there are consumers who are interested in that, then by all means, we could allow that to be like a valuable producer-consumer relationship. But through a more kind of socio-political lens, we have to ask the question of like what it actually means when these AI products are used to generate text. And so I think something we kind of can lose sight of sometimes is that the more interesting question, I think, is not should we have machines generate text for us? It's should we have machines owned and controlled by a very small number of big, powerful technology companies produce language for us, right? Because any language produced by those companies is going to carry the values and the priorities of those companies, which tend to be super different from the values and priorities we have as individuals when we're communicating with one another through literature.
Yeah, I mean, there is a very big lawsuit that's still in process that I am a part of. So 2 of my books were actually stolen to train this LLM, this large language model, right? Which is not okay with me that you use them. So in many ways, it feels to me like writing with AI is cheating. But at the same time, it's here. It's not going away. There's no way we can avoid it or ignore it. So what is the future that we can come to terms with that doesn't feel like this cheating, right? Or that is acceptable somehow?
So I would actually push back against the assumption that it's here to stay, actually, because what we've found is that in all kinds of research from polling agencies like Pew, for example, university researchers have found that, especially in the United States, people don't actually like these products or the companies behind them. So, really significant numbers of people say, I don't want all this AI in my life. The companies themselves have not found a way to be financially successful by selling their product to consumers, right? Or by having us use the product and then selling advertising, right? Based on the information that we give them so that they can show us ads in the products. That hasn't been successful for them. What they have found some success in is convincing companies to like try to get their employees to use AI. But even within companies, a lot of employees are like, this is not something that I want to use. It doesn't make my job any easier. So, because these products are really expensive to make, there's a very possible future in which they don't find a way for it to financially pay off. And these companies are not going to persist if they can't find a way for their products to be financially successful. So, it really seems like the jury is still out. We're not talking about a product that like is taking off financially. It's just here because a lot of investment is going into the hope that they'll figure it out.
I love that you brought that up. If you're just joining us, I'm Rachel Barenbaum. We're talking to Vauhini Vara. She's the author of several amazing novels and also most recently the book Searches Selfhood in the Digital Age. And we are talking about AI and how it is influencing or relating to writing. And Vauhini was just mentioning that there's the financial side of it. And there's some really big ramifications for the finances here. So if you've ever used one of these AI products like ChatGPT or Claude, you can ask a question, give me directions to X, right? Something simple. You don't have to use it just to say, write my essay. And it will come back and it will give you an answer. Now, before these products like ChatGPT or Claude came out, you would go to Google and Google or, some other search engine, Yahoo, would come out and spit out a bunch of links and give you directions and say, here are some restaurants. And it was really like an online white pages or yellow pages. And they were getting paid by these companies who were advertising or, were being connected by these bots. But in AI, we don't see that. So there's no clear financial model. So let's talk about that too, because if ChatGPT takes off, you lose that entire white pages, yellow pages ecosystem that was Google, and no one's talking about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is already happening. So, for example, Google puts AI summaries now at the top of many of its search results. And research has found that that has resulted in people not visiting other websites from which those AI summaries are derived, right? And so that means that the whole infrastructure of the internet that these big technology companies depend on doesn't really have a financial incentive for existing as much anymore, right? If Google is not sending traffic to your website, how is your website going to keep existing and generating the kind of content that Google then exploits in order to show these AI overviews? And the same is true, of course, of ChatGPT or Claude or any of the other ones.
Yeah, so we really are at this moment, I think, an inflection point where not just for writing, but for all kinds of searching, right? We're seeing a possible change ahead. But I want to stick to writing because that's what we look at here on Check This Out. What do you see if you look into your crystal ball, right? 5 years from now, what do you see or what do you think is going to happen with writing and AI? How do you think that's going to be interacting?
So people like Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, or Dario Amodei of Anthropic really like to make pronouncements about exactly what the future is going to look like. But it turns out that when you look at those moments when they make predictions about the future, it's usually when they're trying to raise a bunch of money, frankly. And so they make these predictions saying, like, the world is going to be dominated by AI. Everybody's going to be using it to write, so that those investors who they want to have give them money feel that they're investing in a profitable future, right? The truth is that nobody knows what the future is going to look like. And I'm not willing to make the kinds of pronouncements that those people make. So there is a potential world in which 5 years from now, there's a lot of AI slop that is turning up, for example, on Amazon in the form of self-published books, right? So in that world in which there's a lot of that stuff and people are reading it and it's competing with the traditional literature that's written by humans published in places like Amazon, you can see a way in which that starts to threaten every writer, including those of us who don't write, commercial romance novels, because our publishers like Hachette or Penguin Random House, which publishes me, have businesses that are built on selling a lot of commercially successful work so that they can then subsidize the more literary work that you and I do. And so if people are reading AI slop instead of buying a commercial romance novel from Hachette or from Penguin Random House, that actually affects all of us as writers and as readers. However, there are lots of other potential futures, and one of those futures is a future in which the investors in companies like OpenAI or Anthropic or Google, for that matter, realize that there isn't much of a financial return on their investment. And these companies maybe stick around, but end up being far less powerful than they hope they'll be. And so that's a potential future in which, like, this is all kind of not even a conversation we're having in 5 years, because it turns out nobody wanted to read that stuff. The companies don't have the marketing budgets anymore to push it on us, and it all goes away.
I have never heard that perspective before, and I absolutely love that you brought that out. Vauhini Vara, thank you so much for joining me here on Check This Out.
Thank you for having me, Rachel.
I'm Rachel Barenbaum, author of the novels A Bend in the Stars and Atomic Anna. You've been listening to Check This Out, a show where I get to do one of my favorite things in the world, talk to other writers about their brand new books. Check This Out is a partnership between New Hampshire Public Radio and the PenFaulkner Foundation. I'll be back next week with another new author you should not miss. Our producer is Jessica Hunt. NHPR's program director is Emily Quirk. Our partner, the PenFaulkner Foundation's mission is to champion the breadth and power of fiction in America. The show is sponsored by C&S Wholesale Grocers Family of Companies, the podcast Totally Booked with Zibby and Zibby's Bookshop, and the Jack and Dorothy Byrne Foundation. Remember to go to your local library or bookstore and check out all the books we're talking about this season. Thanks so much for listening. Read on.